Welcome, everyone. I'm Becca. I'm one of the school and teacher programs coordinators at La Brea Tar Pits and Museum, part of the Natural History Museum family. Welcome to another virtual teacher training, and thank you so much for joining us. This afternoon, we'll have the opportunity to learn about STEM identities and their development from Dr. Tonikiaa Orange, and think critically about our role in developing those identities as science educators. During this workshop, we'll hear from Dr. Orange about her experience as a science teacher, her work with UCLA Center X, and how we as educators can empower all of our students to see themselves as scientists. This workshop is also currently being streamed to YouTube with closed captioning in various languages. The recording of this program and all of our past webinars for teachers and students can also be found on our YouTube playlist, which we'll drop a link to in the chat for you. And we'd love to know who's joining us today. So please let us know in the chat your grade level, where you're teaching, where you're joining us from. Maybe you're a parent or supporting a child at home. Let us know. I see already we've got Leela here. Hi, Leela from NHM. So excited to have you all here. Oh, cool. We've got some people from the zoo, Fauché, yes. Awesome, Eunice, hello, Antoinette. So lovely to see you all here. Thanks for joining us. So here's what to expect from this workshop or this training. We'll be together for about an hour. We're going to wrap up this housekeeping in just a second and jump right into hearing from Dr. Orange. After she's finished, I'll share a few related resources, and then we'll have the opportunity to ask her any questions that you may have. We're aiming to wrap up around 5 o'clock, but given the nature of this topic and all of the interest that we've seen from all of you, we've arranged with Dr. Orange to give us a few extra minutes if needed for the Q&A. And if you need to scoot, that's fine. We understand this webinar, again, is being recorded and live streamed, so you can still access it after if you need to. So I'm joined today by my colleagues, Molly Porter, who's the Director of Education at the Natural History Museum and La Brea Tar Pits, and off screen by Rachel Fidler, the Manager of School and Teacher Programs at the Natural History Museum and the La Brea Tar Pits. Thanks so much for your help. And before we begin, Molly would like to help set the tone for today's program and introduce our speaker. So Molly, welcome. Lovely to see you.
Hi, you too, Becca. Thanks so much. And thanks to all of you who are joining. So excited to see our participant list and hear a little bit from you all in the chat about who you are. You'll notice that it is a pretty diverse group of folks, and that's intentional. So this work at NHM for the last several years, the NHM Family Museums has really started to dig deeper into equity in STEM, equity in cultural learning, and just the sense that we want to be a part of change in what the STEM pipeline looks like in our community. And so this is work that has started with us. And now we got to hear from Dr. Orange last year for a staff PD. And we're so excited to bring her back for this talk with a broader community, with some of our external partners, you, teachers, educators in our community. And we're just so excited to learn from her and to continue this work, which we know takes time and energy, but is so, so, so important to all of our work and to our future. So with that being said, I'd like to just introduce Dr. Orange to you all. Some of you may know her already. She serves currently as the director for the Culture and Equity Project and is the assistant director for the Principal Leadership Institute at UCLA Center X. She's been committed to education for over 20 years, and she has served as a teacher and a principal, and she really is grounded in culturally relevant pedagogy, and that's really where we're so excited to learn from her today. So I won't take too much more of these precious minutes because she has a lot to share. So I'm going to pass it to her. She's a colleague and a friend, and thank you so much for being here, Dr. Orange.
Thank you, Molly. Thanks so much. And before I get started, I'm looking at the chat right now, and I just wanted to say hello to all of the PLIers out there. I see you in the chat, so I'm glad to see you here. I'm really happy to be here. The partnership with the Natural History Museum is dear to me, and I love the work that they're doing. So I'm I'm happy to be here for the small amount of time that I actually have. And I'm hoping I can live up to all of the great things that Molly just said actually about me, because I might have shifted some what I wanted to say today just a little bit. So we're going to see if it still fits the bill for her. We can go to the next slide for me. So I thought about today, and I thought about starting off by just thinking about when did I have my own sense of identity as a math and science teacher? When did that come about for me? And I had to think long and hard about that, because I do not remember having any spaces in elementary and middle school that just drew me to math and science. I was okay at them at best. When I got to college, I took math and science courses, but still I was not drawn to them. Teacher ed program, I was not drawn to become a single subject in math and science. But when I did become a teacher, I did teach only math and science. That's all I taught. And I grew to love it. And I realized the reason that I grew to love it and consider myself definitely a teacher of math and science is because I did all the things that I believe science should be about, and any math, STEAM in general, right? It should be about. It should be about play. It should be about your own identity and culture and how it interacts and interrogates dominant cultural norms. It should be about manipulation of ideas and practices and philosophies of science. And not until I became a teacher was that's when I was really actually able to interrogate those things and do it through my own lens and through my own terms. And so it took a long time to identify myself as a math and science teacher, a teacher who teaches math and science. And the sad part is we have a lot of our babies that we work with inside of school spaces that never eventually come to understand and love what science can do for them, just in life in general. And this is where we really want to go. We really want to make sure, how can we, sow the seed so that our, the children that we serve really can see science as a way of life. They can see science as just an art form, because it actually is that, if we thought about it in different ways. So can you go to the next slide? So as we move forward in this brief conversation that we're having today, these are the things that I want you all to take forward today. That students have to see themselves inside of science. And I know we say that quite often, but it's imperative and it is extremely important. We have to be very intentional about that. We want you also to take forward that science questions and problematize dominant beliefs, norms, and practices. That is what it does. And that's the forefront. We should put that in the forefront, that we are always questioning and problematizing all the things that we believe are to be true to create new potential and new possibilities. Right? Science classrooms help students make sense of the ever-changing world. It's not just about the past, it's where we're going in the future. And science is a mechanism to help them, if you can think this way, as a mechanism to help them think about, where do we need to go into the future, and what do we need to invent and create and bring forward. And the last thing to take forward in this conversation today is to recognize that science needs space and time and resources to actually do inquiry-based science, to do the things that I said I didn't get to do until I became a teacher, to manipulate, to interrogate, to transform, to think about what the possibilities might be. We need space and time and resources to do that, right? And so we're going to interrogate these four things as we move through. So let's start off with why students must see themselves. So let's go to the next slide. All right, next slide. Students must see themselves. Here we go. Right. So one of the things I always ask folks when I'm working with teachers is, if I walk into your classroom, where will students see themselves? So here are a couple questions I usually ask folks. Name a scientist under the age of 40. Can you do that? Name a woman who is a scientist. What do scientists do? Name a scientist who is African American or Latinx and they're under the age of 40. Name a science class that you really enjoyed. And then, where have you seen yourself in a science classroom? These questions are important. I think about this for my own daughters when they walk inside of a space. I ask them, where have you seen yourself inside of a science classroom? And the sad part is my daughters have said that they never really have seen themselves inside a science class. They don't really know what you mean by that, right? One, it's the way we think about science in elementary school, and how we also disconnect it when they get to high school, that we have these separate content specialties where science is really interconnected to begin with, from life sciences to chemistry to physics, but we separate things and we work these work in silos. But science is really, it's not like that. It's really interconnected, but we don't see it that way. And so there's also this disconnect on how students walk in and what they see, how they see themselves when they walk inside of the classroom. So for science teachers, if we don't start with some basic understanding of how are students seeing themselves and what do they see when they walk inside of space, we're already not helping to produce a science identity, right? You have to know that this is something that I can do and something that I can achieve, and people have come before me. And again, this also speaks to just age. No one wants to look at somebody who's 65 years old when you're 15 years old, trying to end up being it and say, let's go be a scientist now, right? We have to think about these when we say, where have you seen yourself in a science classroom? We have to really understand who our students are so they can see themselves when they walk inside of this space. Next slide. Next slide. When we ask folks, that's fine, you can stay right there. When we ask folks about where they, when we ask students, when we go out into the field to draw what scientists look like, right? And how do they see themselves or see others as scientists? We get pictures that look like this, like Albert Einstein with like gray hair, older, white. This is what we typically get. It has not shifted much, and we need to continue to make sure it does shift in science classrooms. It's small and simple, but it's extremely impactful. Next slide, please. You look at the Nobel Prize winners in chemistry and physiology or medicine in 2020. These are the pictures that you come up with, right? And thank goodness there are some women there, right? If we go through the past and we look at some of the award winners, we end up seeing things that look like mostly older white men, right? How do we diversify this? What does it look like? If we can't name scientists who are under the age of 40, if we can't name scientists that are Latinx, African American, if we can't name diversity of scientists, then we do our students that we serve a disservice. And that's all students, not just our brown and black students, but all students, right? Next slide, please. Here's the 2020 in physics. I'm not sure about you, but I know that if I put this picture in my classroom when I taught math and science in middle school, this would not move my students to all of a sudden say, I just really want to be a student. I really want to be a scientist, right? This doesn't move them. And this is why we have to check our own identities as we walk inside of these spaces to teach, to make sure that we're understanding this might be my lens and what I see and where I come from, but the way where my students are, they're 15. They see their life experiences are different. Their communities may be different. So what I need in order to create that STEAM identity, you really need to make sure that you're thinking about what do students see when they walk inside the spaces. And if we can't answer the questions about a scientist that's under the age of 40, or one that happens to be from a diverse background, one that happens not to be older and white, then we're doing ourselves a disservice and we're not helping to develop STEM and STEAM identity for the children, for the students that we serve. Next slide, please. Science is also about, again, interrogating practices and helping students interrogate what is being perpetrated to them out in social media. And granted, Google searches have changed quite a bit. I mean, we can talk about the development of algorithms and how biased they are to begin with, but they are trying to change a little bit of that. But typically, when students are looking up scientists and what they who are scientists in social media or on TV, these are the images that they end up getting. Even like going back from the hit show, The Big Bang Theory, that is not only a hit show here in America, but all across the world. It's a huge show. And these are the images of what scientists look like. And for the children I serve, these are not the images that perpetuate and they propel them to want to go into science or believe that they can be scientists because they never see anyone that looks like them or even in an age bracket that fits them, right? So next slide, please. So understanding who students are, and making sure that when they walk inside of a space that they see themselves is just a beginning step to create a STEM and STEAM identity, a science identity for them. So the question to leave you all with is that if I walked inside of your classrooms, where would students see themselves in the history of science? Where would they see themselves in the philosophy of science? Like whose philosophy is privileged inside of that science class? Or in the instruction of science? That if I understood who my students were culturally, what would my instruction look like in science to benefit them, to support them, right? To make sure that they were seen inside of those classrooms. Right? So this is just a question to ask yourself around what does it look like again to create a STEM identity inside of my classroom, and having a STEM identity and being able to be seen inside of a science classroom is definitely a beginning step. Right? Next slide, please. The second thing to think about is that I wanted to bring forward is that science questions and problematizes dominant beliefs, norms, and practices. That cultural experiences, they move students to question and problematize the dominant beliefs and norms and practices that we have in society, in schools, in our institutions. And it's important for us to make sure that we have the space for students to make sure that they can problematize the dominant beliefs and norms. It is imperative for folks who especially work with students that are marginalized, that this is part of what they do and part of what they understand science to be. It's not just the learning of facts. It's not just the learning of, microorganisms and how they move and shift over time. It is understanding how cultural experiences interact with what science says to be. Cultural experiences interact with where we want things to go in the future. It's because I see a problem inside of my own cultural experience that I decide to solve it, that I decide to go and work with someone else and co-construct something that's different and new. And those experiences matter. And so we're asking folks to really think about how are we using science to question and problematize the beliefs and norms and practices that we have in institutions about science and in the world in general. Students in their cultural settings, they create science, I always say, all the time. They're always doing something. And so thinking about problematizing dominant beliefs and norms, we just have a few examples here of just some things that have taken place around this. Fracking. So fracking, there's a fracking, I don't know what you call it, a fracking, fracking area right next to the neighborhood where I used to teach. And so what was eventually brought into science was the notion of fracking and how it impacted where we lived and why was there a fracking area right next to our home and it wasn't someplace else. Was fracking good? Was fracking bad? Right? Who believed in it? Who didn't? Difference between what business owners who wanted fracking versus what community members felt. It led us to problematize and question our own beliefs about oil and natural energy. And that's what science does. It problematizes beliefs, norms, and practices so that we can create, again, something that's new. Having a discussion in a science class around environmental justice versus environmental racism, which was one that came about inside of a classroom. Again, just sitting a simple question around where was this flooding taking place in neighborhoods, and students realizing we have to do something different because the lower socioeconomic status, the neighborhoods that were in a lower socioeconomic area, that their homes were flooding, and some folks were saying, well, is this considered environmental justice or is it environmental racism, right? We're questioning and problematizing the things that are going on from our own cultural backgrounds and experiences. These were happening here in Los Angeles where we were, not in Arizona, not in Colorado, here. And the same should happen in other science classrooms across the country, that you are thinking about how the cultural experiences move students to question and problematize things, because that's where science actually comes from. It comes from your own practices and your own experiences and saying, this is happening to me. I want to solve something about this. I need to create something. This is how all science has been, has moved through time. It's because someone from their own experiences have decided that they need to figure out something and move something forward to change the lives of many, many folks, right? And then the last thing I want to say about problematizing dominant beliefs and norms, and that science questions, and that's what science does, is just by Dr. Christopher Emnon, who's at the university, he's at Columbia University, science professor there. And he uses hip hop to teach in his science classrooms when he was a teacher. And he still does it now as professional development and when he works with teachers and things like that. But hip hop, he uses it as a mental model to connect, construct, question, and produce scientific thought. And the reason why I think it's important here is because we're looking at, again, culturally who our students are when they step inside of a science classroom. And not if you go to rural Colorado, hip hop might not be the mechanism for connection and construction and questioning, right? But whatever it is in rural Colorado, that's what you would use to connect, construct, question, and produce scientific thought. And so for me, working in urban school districts, it is used and it is a connector because it's an art form, and it's an art form that helps, that connects folks around their age culture and culturally who they are. And so it is using that culture to help think about how do we use that to problematize? How do we use it to continuously question and practice and question dominant norms and practices inside of classrooms so that we can end up becoming more, our students become more aware of what science is and how it impacts their entire lives and how they can use it, whether they become scientists or not, which is really what we want, always to question and problematize, whether they become scientists or not. Next question. And not next question, I'm sorry, next slide. Science classrooms help students make sense of the ever-changing world. So this is the next thing to bring forward when we think about helping students with their own STEM identity, STEAM identity, not STEM. I use STEAM particularly because the art, the A part in there, the arts is extremely important. Right? It recognizes the subjective nature of science. So understanding that there's an objectivity that we talk about in science, but really recognizing at the true core that there is that science in itself is very subjective, right? Because there's an evolution of ideas. And we want students to understand that there's an evolution of ideas when we work inside of the fields of science. That because the world changes, so do theories and beliefs and attitudes. Because I live in certain areas and my experience are different, so are my evolution of ideas will be different than other folks, right? It's the changing that we see, how we view changing climate change now, how we view the changing of microorganisms and how they influence climate change, how we think about water irrigation systems, how it looks one way to have a water, think about an irrigation system in Africa will look different than an irrigation system here, and how that's evolved over time. Right? It's the efficacy of vaccines and attitudes by the public on vaccines, right? Things evolve over time, or they stay stagnant over time, right? And we're asking folks to think about the evolution because it is so subjective. Why people of color, particularly African Americans, are not prone to taking the vaccine where everyone else is. It recognizes the subjective nature of science. And because we recognize that, it opens up the possibilities again for students to explore, to question, to theorize things that they never ever thought about, right? But because it's situated inside of their own experiences and their own beliefs, we have to give them space and time to do that. And we have to help students understand that science is subjective, right? And it's not just its objective content. It is subjective. And it's important for students to recognize that as they move forward to, again, creating their own science identity, so that they understand that I'm always questioning. Sometimes it's not just a right or wrong, it's questioning and it's inquiry based and it's going right back and trying it again. And that's where we want students to get in the mindset to be able to do that it's an ever-changing world and there's always an evolution of ideas. Right? Next slide, please. And the last thing that I wanted to bring forward is to recognize that space and time is needed to do inquiry-based science. Right? That questions, we need to question the world, processes, challenges, and the theories. We have to have space and time inside of our schools that we allow students to do that. That we have to problematize the dominant views of why something is or why it is not. Right? Again, recognizing as scientists on where did this come from? Who is it for? Why do they say it is what it is? It is important to problematize those dominant views, right, and create our own. We have to use identities to understand and question. We want our students to understand. We have to give space and time for that, to say, who are you and what do you bring? And how does it influence the way you think about the theories that you want to put forward, right? Because who you are defines and dictates what theories you believe and how you want to challenge certain things inside of a space. That manipulate, to play, to interrogate, and discover. These are all things that we say we want to do inside of science classrooms and inside of science spaces, even again, even our out of school spaces that focus on STEAM education. However, given the space and the time and the resources are often very difficult, because this is really what they need to have in order to do the science that we really want to take place inside of schools, and what really transform the way we think about science education to begin with. They need time to reflect, time to say that this worked, it didn't work, I need to try something different. I need time to be able to sit with that. We don't give students a lot of time to reflect in school because we're on to the next in science in all of our content areas, but we're on to the next. We need to give folks time to co-create with others. They need the space and the time to do that. It is through the co-creation, right, and working with other folks that you end up coming up with something that you never thought of before. It is it's the co-construction leads you to what we call is like the space of possibilities, like what could be there. And we need time and space to give students the time to co-construct. And we can't take it for granted, but we often do, because again, our schedules are on just this like machine. We just move from one thing to the next. But it takes time to reflect, time to co-create in order to become to think like we want folks to think when it comes to inquiry-based like science. Right? So the time and the space is needed, because science classroom should be a space of possibilities. It should be a place, a space where students are able to explore and to think, to fail and retry and to reflect and start it all over again. It should be a place of possibilities, not a place where there's a right or wrong, but of possibilities. And we've created inside of our schools right now not much space and not much time for it to be spaces of possibilities. So I believe that teachers, we don't have much time to wait. We can't wait for other folks to do it. We have to be very deliberate about what we do inside of science classrooms, because we don't have the time to wait if we want to create and change the trajectory of the students that we're serving right now, and what it looks like in the fields of science right now, on who's being hired, who's not being hired, the lack of diversity that's in all of the science fields across the board, right? We need to act now and do something that's different now. Next slide, please. So the now for me is what I called like deliberate teaching for radical change. And so let me explain this really quickly. Next slide, please. So deliberate teaching. Our work as educators who teach science, STEAM, is intentionally driven by equity, anti-racism, anti-Blackness, and our deliberate teaching practices lead to more young people who are aware in order to subvert and change circumstances that maintain the status quo. If we are teaching students who are marginalized and we are not focused on using and making sure that our science classrooms are built to, again, question and problematize issues of race, issues of anti-Blackness, issues of anti-racism, and figure out what that means for them, right? To make them aware of dominant cultural norms that say certain things and lead to certain places. and we're not helping them subvert the circumstances of the status quo, we're not doing our job as educators. We have to be deliberate about that when we walk inside of those classroom spaces. Next. Yep. And radical change. It's the focus our thinking on fundamentally changing social structures and practices that dehumanize students. Radical change seeks to impact resources, norms, and pedagogy to alter the state we are in that normalizes inequity in science classrooms and beyond. So we need some radical change. We need to make sure that inside of our science classrooms, we're not practicing things that dehumanize students when they walk into spaces. So having a student say, I see myself inside of a science classroom is what we need. Having students feeling like they have a space and time to critique theories and practices, who says who and who says what is right or wrong is really what we need. We need spaces where students understand that science is also about subverting and changing circumstances that maintain the status quo. It's not just about maintaining the status quo that continuously dehumanizes and marginalizes certain folks inside of our society. Click it one more time, please. Thank you. So deliberate teaching for radical change. It says we don't have any time to wait for change. We have to be deliberate in what we're doing, what we're changing, and why it is needed. Our teaching is the action. It's not a new curriculum. It's not a new, it's not a new best practice. The teaching is the action. And we have to start with the micro, meaning that we're starting with what it is we can do inside of our own spaces, not what we're asking everybody to do on the outside. We can't change right now the way the state says this is how we have to, this is what we're using, and this is how the standards that we have to implement, and this is how much time might be given. But what we can do is we can change what we have control of, which is inside of our classrooms. So the question is always, what are you doing in the micro? What are you doing inside of your own space to make sure we are deliberate in how we teach science and why we teach science and what folks are walking into, and that we're thinking about it through this radical change, right? That we don't have time to wait, because there are many things out there that are dehumanizing students when they walk inside of our classrooms. And I don't want my science classroom to be another space where they feel that they are walking in and don't see themselves and feel dehumanized, right? So we have to be deliberate about that, and we need radical change. And we're starting at the micro. We're starting with you. That's what we do, right? Next slide, please. So we can't wait for a new strategy or program. We must make moves to change the way we think about science, right? I say not wait for a new strategy or program, because just a new strategy or program, we can still reproduce inequity and still dehumanize students by the way we implement it, and by our own identities and positionalities and how we implement something, right? So we can't wait for that. We have to understand who our students are. We have to remember that what are we deliberate about teaching inside of science, right? Which is creating these STEM identities for students, recognizing that I don't know everything about who my students are culturally, so I need to learn more about what that means and how that shows up inside of my science spaces. It means, how can I be deliberate about what theories am I bringing forward? Is this how we decided that we know a scientist who created this, but we don't know a scientist that comes from another part of the world that created this, something similar, but this dominant way of viewing it was put on a pedestal and is what presented inside of the classroom. Who am I presenting inside of this space for our students, right? Who do they get to see? And that's important, very important, right? We have to present, we have to use the present to take action to create enlivened spaces. And this is something Margaret Wheatley always talks about. It's like, what is it that I do to create an enlivened space for my students? So when students walk inside of your science classroom, is it an enlivened space, right? Does it feel like anybody would like to be there, right? Does it just feel rote? Like it's like the next class? Because again, if I had to wait to become a teacher to obviously love math and science, that's a problem. If my daughters have said throughout their entire science career, they have not, one, they told me they don't know what scientists do. And the second thing is they told me that they don't remember a place where they actually felt like they were seen or that they really enjoyed a science class, right? It's become a means to an end. I just have to get by, right? And so we don't want that to be. We want folks to understand that science is an important part of just not just something we have to finish to get out of school, but it's something that we use in our lives from here until the time we leave this earth. Right? Next slide, please. And so, how do we move forward? Just a couple of things for us to think about. The first thing is that we definitely need to recruit more diverse teachers that teach science, teach STEAM. This is not an easy order to do. We're thinking about this consistently at UCLA, and it's an intentional effort for us to think about how do we continuously recruit those groups that are marginalized the most into the field of science to teach. Right? And part of that, again, you go back to the history of it, is that I didn't even enjoy science and math until I became a teacher of it and decided to do it. So again, we have to spark this. This is a intergenerational and a longitudinal type of thing that we have to do here, right? We have to start very young and move this on forward all the way to higher ed. And even thinking again about higher ed, how we think about the teaching of math and science, and how we decide how people can enter into the fields of math and science and then become a teacher. All of those things have to be considered, but it's imperative, right? That students, and that's all students, see teachers that are very diverse inside of the sciences, right? Professional development, not just around best practices, but around thinking about the cultural norms in the context of the students that we work with. Right? Again, best practices are fine, but they're only best practices in the context in which you work. So doing something in one context doesn't mean it's a best practice in the next context, right? Because every single classroom is different. This is how come it's really important for folks to get professional development that really understands the context and the cultural norms in which for the students that they teach, because that dictates how you need to shift. This dictates what your pedagogy should look like. This dictates what artifacts you should have in your room and on your walls. This even helps dictate what the content might look like and how you can shift the content to better suit who your students are culturally and their own lived experiences. That's what we need professional development around. Science classrooms need more culturally responsive content and instruction. And again, when we're thinking about content and instruction, we're thinking about, specifically for me, age, because what we're interested in is what is important for students when they're 15. How do we engage 15-year-olds in science? And it's different than what we would, how we would have engaged in science when we were 15 years old, right? So how are we thinking about who students are, and what does that content look like? And then what does our instruction look like to help support who they are? And deliberate about creativity, that you're not going to find responsive spaces and a focus on STEM identity or STEAM identity inside of curriculum or from textbook companies. Standards won't provide that for you at all. You have to be creative to do it. So for me, it was being creative when I became a science and math teacher to decide, what am I learning from my students and how am I going to bring that into whatever this content standard is? It was not the reverse. It was, what am I learning from them and how are we going to use that to end up teaching science? And again, it's the way I thought about it when I became a teacher, but it's the whole notion of inquiry-based science and how folks should think about science to begin with. Next slide, please. And so I'm going to leave you with James Baldwin quote. He said, "The purpose of education," finally, Baldwin asserted, "is to create in a person the ability to look at the world for himself, to make his own decisions, to say to himself, this is a black, or this is white, to decide for himself whether there is a God in heaven or not, to ask questions of the universe, and then learn to live with those questions, is the way he achieves his own identity." I'm leaving you with this quote because this James Baldwin, it speaks very clearly to me about understanding how we're helping to students create their own identity. And we want a science identity. They have to question. They have to be able to look word for themselves. They have to be able to question. They have to decide, make decisions for themselves, interrogate and problematize the world in which they live in. And with that, and with the help of us, again, critiquing who we are and recognizing what students walk into every day, we can help students have a better, a closer relationship with science, more of a STEAM identity, so that they can continue to use this throughout their entire lives. And science is near and dear to me. And I really want to emphasize that this is about micro changes, not macro, that I believe that even making the small steps will help influence the bigger decisions that we have to make inside of education. So whatever steps we make inside our own classrooms help change the trajectory of lives for students, and eventually what happens at the larger scale about what science education looks like. So the hope is that we start with the micro, and the hope is that we remember that we're trying to cultivate STEAM identities for students. We need space and time to do that. And we have to make sure that we understand who our students are culturally and bring that context into the classroom. So that's it. And that's all for me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Orange. You're always so inspiring, and I know I have a lot to consider and reflect on, and I'm excited to get into our Q&A because I know we've got a lot of questions. So if you do have questions, you can pop those into the Q&A function or into the chat, and we'll try to grab those. Before we get into those, I do want to make sure we have time to go over these resources really quickly. And again, we'll drop these links into the chat for you, and you'll also get an email with all of these links as well, so you can peruse them later. We've got here about the UCLA Center X. They've been working for 25 years, and we've been so fortunate to have a relationship with Dr. Orange, as Molly mentioned earlier, and we hope to continue that. And we encourage you to check out their website. They do have a lot of information about the Culture and Equity Project. They also have a science project, as well as home learning resources, or virtual home learning resources as well, that are really fantastic. And then we have some resources from the Natural History Museum that we want to highlight as well. Again, there are just so many out there right now, but these are some that are local to our museum and to LA County, and we feel like they're easy to implement in your classrooms right away. So you'll see we have our Meet the Scientist events. We have dates coming for the next semester coming soon. So if you're on our email list, you'll get an email with all of that information. You can also find on our website a community science teacher guide. We love our community science department. They're really fantastic in making sure that they cultivate scientific identities in all of our community, not just our students. So lots of great resources there. And then we've also partnered with Skype a Scientist. You can Skype a Natural History Museum scientist with your classroom or with your family, and they will talk to you a little bit about their career in science and how they evolved into a science professional. And you can also select a scientist that self-identifies with a particular affinity group if you want to highlight that within your classroom. So lots of great resources there. And then LA County, of course, also has tons of great resources that are working towards creating positive STEAM identities. I'm going to start saying that now too, because I do agree with you, Dr. Orange. Art is part of the scientific process for sure. So we've got Boundless Brilliance. They're a group that brings free and empowering STEM workshops to local elementary schools in order to close the gender gap in STEM and create a field that reflects the diversity of the world that we actually live in. There's also DIY Girls, which is a group that they are hoping to increase girls' interest and success in technology, engineering, and making. And Community Nature Connection works to increase access to the outdoors for communities impacted by racial, socioeconomic, and disability injustices by eliminating existing barriers through advocacy, community-centered programming, and workforce development. We have tons of great resources for teachers and students, so definitely check them out. And then we've got, of course, Friends of the LA River, which also works towards elevating the river in the mind of Angelinos and working to ensure equitable public access and meaningful ecological restoration as the single largest unifying force of the river. So again, they have lots of great virtual resources that are available now, and of course, great robust education program in person that hopefully can get started again soon. And then last but not least, we found that the LA County Office of Education and its philanthropic arm, the Greater LA Education Foundation, have launched a Teacher of the Year Equitable Innovation Grant Initiative, and they're accepting applications for that through January 15th. It's open to all educators in LA County Public Schools, which includes counselors and club leaders. So I encourage you to think about how you might use these funds to support your deliberate teaching practices. So definitely check them out as well. And again, all of these will be sent to you in email, so don't worry if you didn't get all of them right now. And now let's head into our Q&A. So we'll try to get through as many of these as we can. And again, you can drop them in as we continue. So our first question is from Nicole. How do you recommend science? Oh wait, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, sorry, so we can see. How do you recommend science instruction for early elementary teachers during distance learning with very little time to teach science? And I know Molly had some thoughts on that as well, but Dr. Orange, why don't you start us off with that?
Well, I'm going to eventually flip that right over to Molly. I think that I think everything is very difficult, of course, because of distance learning. It makes it even more difficult, as you all know, because again, I talk about space, time, and resources. And when I talk about resources, parents as resources, because they're huge resources. But to ask parents who are already struggling to go and get materials that you need to manipulate something, or to sit to help someone who's very young to do something, that's a resource. And it's very difficult to ask parents to move forward. So the only thing that I really have, Molly, again, she might have some different suggestions for this, is that you do what you can do, right? And that maybe that the activities, even though I want science to be a manipulation and to think about and play in hands because they're young, you just keep doing the things that I'm sure you're already doing. If this is the Nicole that I know it is, Nicole on here, that you are taking things in chunks, like you're probably already doing, in smaller increments, that you're doing the best that you can to have students, I don't know, manipulate the things that are already there. And I think some schools have already hand out and given students things to take home so that parents didn't have to scramble and figure out what they need for the projects. I think they've given that to them, because I think that definitely helps for young parents. But I think it's context specific. And I think you have to think about who the students are that you're serving, what it is, the resources you have available, and what is reasonable that you can expect them to do at this point in time. And then you make your decisions on how to move forward there. And the biggest thing for me is that at the same time, we're always thinking about having students be able to question and interrogate something. And however best you can do that, that's what you move forward, given the space that we're in right now with COVID. Molly, you might have some.
I think absolutely. And I think that idea of integration and of questioning and just science as a thought process is something that you can reiterate. And I think the consistency will help the students maybe make a mental shift. Something we've been talking about at the museum kind of lately is, instead of talking about let's be a scientist, talk about doing science, make it a verb. And when you think critically about something, when you have your students just observe something outside their window, or think about what they just read in a book, or watch a YouTube video of lightning striking, whatever it may be, just that act of thinking about what you saw and what it might mean, and then identifying that activity as doing science, observing the world around you and using your brain to think about it. That's something that we have really been trying to encourage our own museum educators and more formal educators to do, because it doesn't take those resources, which are so exhausting for parents and for kiddos, to try and kind of maybe do what we think of as lab science at home. It also might help us move our mental image of what a scientist is or where they are, right? They don't have to be in a lab to be doing science. We love that lab coat image, right? It's that classic Albert Einstein that we were looking at earlier. So just that sense that me in my, staring out my window, if there's a bird and I'm noticing what it's doing, I'm doing science by observing the world around me and thinking about what it might mean. So that's for me, that's where we come from, especially in this moment where we can't be together and can't do hands-on the way we usually do. It's more about a state of mind, but I think we can start to make the micro shifts in terms of, oh, I can do science. Not only I am doing science by using my brain this way.
And I also think the reason why the STEAM part is important, the A, it's because even when we talk to a lot of the folks who work in out of school programs around the arts, they're always asking, why aren't they, every time folks get together, the folks who teach science or math, and they say they're STEAM, they always leave out the A, because part of it, again, is through the arts and just drawing, it's observing, it's creating mental models, it's creating constructs of things. That's why art is so important, to make sure we understand that, like drawing arts and doing whatever figures you're doing, it is about science. And so again, just shifting the mental model, like Molly said, around, art is a part of that. And that's why the STEAM is very important with the A versus just the STEM. Yeah.
Thank you so much for those thoughts. We have a couple suggestions in the chat too that I think everyone would appreciate hearing. Is Elizabeth suggested integrating science with other content areas, kind of like what you're suggesting, Dr. Orange, about bringing that art in. And then Zana says that her K1 students have been observing the weather and identifying pattern, an easily accessible and enjoyable way for them to connect that in. Yeah, okay, so our next question, we've got one here. What was the moment or experience that you decided science was for you and it was something that you could do?
This is for me?
Yes, for you, Dr. Orange.
I didn't think about that until I actually became a teacher. I just didn't. I was forced in elementary school to decide, did you want to teach English and history at the time, or math and science? And it was literally just a decision that I did not feel like reading and editing a bunch of papers in English. So I decided to teach math and science. That's what it was. But I didn't choose it because it was something that I thought I would like. It wasn't until I actually started to delve into it that I realized I absolutely loved it. And I said to myself, why did I not like, I wish I would have thought more about it when I was in middle school and high school and college. And I avoided it and just took what I had to take in college just to get through it. And I took chemistry and physics, all of that stuff, but I did not love it until I was able to manipulate it and started doing things and investigating it on my own. And I fell in love. And that's the only thing I ever taught was math and science. I didn't want to. Now, I believe there's an integration because, again, I believe we work in silos with science to begin with. All of the sciences are interconnected. It's just like a science teacher is also a language arts teacher, right? That you should be teaching writing and reading and everything you do. So should all the rest of everything should be integrated as well. I mean, math is not separated from what we end up doing in science, but we do think about these things in silos. So we have to be really creative about how we think about integrating science into every single thing we do, just like writing and just like language and all of the rest of the things. And it's not an easy thing to do. It's a lot of work. It is.
Definitely a lot of work for sure. We've got a couple questions here. Again, kind of asking for some ideas to integrate these ideas in with other content areas. So we're wondering, what activities can I incorporate into my classroom to introduce African American and Latinx mathematicians to high school students? And similar to that, there is a question about, do you have a math project. And I'm not sure if that's specific towards creating these identities, or I think it's kind of connected to the idea of bringing in that mathematician perspective as well.
So I'm not sure what the math project meant. So I'm not positive, but maybe you can write something to clarify that. But the notion of bringing in, African American or Latinx mathematicians, it's just a matter of us ending up doing our own research. I know just on the site that you all just received from resources, I think one of the resources was just around looking at issues of gender inside of science. And these were trans scientists who were transgender, right? I think that's what it was. I can't remember, but it was looking at the LGBTQ community inside of science, right? And it's a matter of us just doing our own resources to figure it out. I searched for women scientists when I was a teacher. I searched for scientists that were under the age of 40, people that, I didn't even know. I was not an expert in it by any means. I had to go and really dig deep to find folks that were, again, under the age of 40 that were part of the community, and they were hard to find. I also worked with the school, and they connected with like NSBE, like the national, it's the Engineering Black Association. And so they connected with that organization to help think about how do we get folks who are in engineering who happen to be African American to come inside of school. So there was a school, they work with that organizations. So you literally have to seek out, and part of that is again because if we don't seek it out, then the dominant narrative stays inside of the school space, that it's older white men who are in the STEAM fields. And so I searched them out, and it's the same thing that everyone will have to do. You have to search them out. There might be some new books now that might be, Black scientists in there. But you have to really look. Usually it might be Benjamin Banneker or somebody like that. Not that you can't have him on the wall as well. I'm just saying, it's not just about the past, it's also about the future. And there are Black scientists today working right now in the field that we should be investigating and bringing forth. And Latinx, and when it comes to, our non-gender norming, or even, thinking about I always wonder how students with special needs are centered inside of our science classrooms. Often we don't think about that. What must it be like to be a student with special needs and walk into a space and never see anything represented by you in any class that you ever walk into? Right? So again, these are the things that we have to ask ourselves, and we have to do the work behind the scenes because no one's handing it to us to do it.
Can I jump in with a random thought? I guess it's not that random, but thinking about gender, another small behavioral change that you could make, or that I'm encouraging, our teams at the museum to think about. We still tend to default to male. Even your beautiful quote, Dr. Orange, at the end, the person he, right? And so we know in education there's a lot of she, and that's really great, but I think we still fall into these gender norms of the person he, and we even do it when we're talking about animals, which we do a lot at the Natural History Museum. So, this whatever dinosaur skull, clearly male, right? And everything's male, 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 male. So just my little plug to, if we try and change our language around not just gender, but of course also racial diversity, and just surround ourselves and immerse ourselves in different images and different frames, then it's gonna get to our students. I truly believe that.
Absolutely.
It's
I think
micro.
you're both right.
It's
Yes.
starting at the micro, and what Molly just mentioned is about the micro. It's about those small shifts that we make, like she said.
Yeah, and taking the time to do that research to find those resources, and taking the time to come to this, where we can also share resources that we've found, right? So that's, I hope, a big part of what we love about our educator community is that we can share these resources. And yeah, there's a lot out there right now. There's the two campaigns that you're talking about, Dr. Orange. One is called 500 Women Scientists. Another one is called 500 Queer Scientists. So just again, trying to encourage people to think outside of that male-dominated, white male-dominated mindset of science. So yeah, some great resources on those sites as well. So I do encourage you to check that out. We've got another question here. We're wondering, science language can sometimes feel exclusionary, and how can we as educators make it more inclusive? I think we kind of touched on that a little bit with what Molly was saying in terms of not defaulting to the male perspective. But do you have any other thoughts on that you'd like to share?
I think, of course, science language, you're right, can be exclusionary. The language, the vocabulary, because of the types of, the type of vocabulary that's there. I think for me, part of us thinking about how we present science to students is around making sure that that we're introducing the concepts in a way that's context specific for them, in a way that is situated inside of culturally like who they are. And then we introduce those words along the way, and we introduce the language along the way. And the biggest thing for me is for students to recognize that science it is a language in itself, and the way we represent and the way you want to speak about it in your own home language or own home tongue is just as fine as well. And so there's this understanding that you're multilingual in understanding this language of science, and you also can speak and engage in it and understand it in the way you would speak and go home and explain it to your mother. Because the way you come home and explain a scientific thing that you've learned or done inside of a classroom to your mother may not be the exact same way you would do it if you walked into a science classroom. But to understand for the students that it's just another language that you have to learn, but introducing it first on how does this impact your life? What does it mean? And with language that folks understand and it makes sense for them, and then gradually, connecting them then to the language of that they use in the field of science, because eventually they have to be graduated to that, and to help them bridge that gap, and to bridge, it's not a gap, but just to help them bridge their connectedness to that language. And if the language is already connected to something that they already understand and already know, because we presented it in a way that suits who they are culturally and in their own context, it's much easier to then bridge that gap between the science language. I always thought of them as it's just another language that we just have to learn. It's not better than anything else. We just use it when we get ready to explain science.
Great, thank you. I've got another question that I think you both can help reflect on as parents and educators. We're wondering, how can educators support parents in developing their children's STEAM identities?
So I'm gonna refer back to exactly what Molly said. I think it's just a shift in helping parents understanding what science actually is. So even in the first question, I said, like, do you know what like scientists do? And people can't even answer that question. I remember my kids saying, I asked them, our doctor scientists? And they were like, I don't really know if they are. That's because they don't really have a concept of what they do. So helping parents understand that creating the geometric structure of a bottle or something is science. Helping, like Molly, I think, saying like, let's observe a bird outside and the wing colors or whatever. That's science, because it's the act of doing it. It's the observation, it's the interrogation, it's the construction of something that's new. So to help parents understand and have a new model in their mind or shift about what science actually is a start and can help, right? Because if I didn't make a shift until I already got to college, I mean, there are a lot of parents that we're working with that don't have that shift either. They see science as very isolated, and it's just certain things that you do inside of science, not thinking that it's a world of possibilities. And that's the onus is on us to help educate them. So helping the parents that you work with to realize all of this is science, and all of this, what we're doing here, this is science too. So when you do this, this is science, and help. I don't know if the shift will come overnight. I don't believe it will. But it's the micro. So it's the small changes in talking to parents about how they see it, because of their own lens that they don't see it that way often.
Molly, do you have any more to add to that one?
Not too much. I think it's just about new habits, you know, helping parents create those habits, just like we're going to help the students create habits. And parents are being asked, as we all know, they're being asked so much right now to kind of manage at home, but we're all still talking to our kids, right? Mostly. We're all still talking to our kids, and maybe, you know, just that habit of, what do you think's going on there, you know, with whatever you see, and integrating it into our life practice. Even if the parent doesn't completely think it's science, or the student doesn't completely think it's science, that's okay, because they're still developing those kind of, you know, mental pathways that will eventually come to serve them in scientific arenas.
Awesome, thank you.
And can I just say, I think about this because I think about when parents are at home, and again, trying, like Molly said, those just like small little shifts. And when you ask your child a question at home, and about, so what do you think about this, and or just whatever question it might be, right, to kind of help them interrogate something. Students, this is what, so some parents will say, well, I don't get anything back from my kid. My kid doesn't say anything. They're just like, I don't want, you know, why are you answering? I mean, why are you asking me that? I don't know. You know what? I don't know. I don't want to answer that question. And I go back to to think that we've taught students to be inside of our educational system to be so dependent and so scaffold driven that we've killed the joy of interrogation and the joy of questioning inside of space. This is the reason why we have to start thinking about this really early, changing mindsets about what science is for teachers and our education programs, and the way the state even thinks about doing the programs, but and for our parents, because by the time they get to my daughter's age, which they're 15, they've already have been taught to be very dependent learners and not very independent. And that dependency then creates non-interrogation, non-inquisitiveness. You know, you just wait to be scaffold and scaffold and scaffold. And that's not what we want. Independent learners. We want folks that question, but we kill that joy along the way. And so again, just thinking about how are we starting to, again, have a different mental model of what science is, and starting that very young, helping parents and helping them understand what it is, and helping teachers think about how we need space and time to do the interrogation, the questioning, the problem solving. And it should be interwoven in everything. All content areas should be that way to begin with, right? So that our kids will be able to, so parents won't get when they're in the house. So can you tell me what did you notice there? Like, I don't know, it's red. What do you want me to say, Mom? You know, so you don't get that in the house, right? It's small shifts. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Not at all. No, I jumped in. I think it's that, and this is can parallel, right? If educators are letting conversations be truly open-ended in the classroom, then if we can kind of scooch parents towards open-ended conversations at home, again, it's just gonna amplify each other. It's just gonna support each other. Those of you who know me know that I'm a big fan of visual thinking strategies, and that is one way to have conversations and have dialogue that is truly open and accepting, and there really isn't a right answer. And it's a powerful way to approach all different content areas if you truly kind of commit to that open-endedness. Excuse me. And so I think we can all think of small ways to examine our own behavior and make sure that we do allow space and time for students to not have to have the answer. Also, we can model it. If we're okay not knowing, or we're okay puzzling through something, or just being intrigued or interested by something, then again, we're hopefully going to model that, whether we're in the teacher role or the parent role. We can still try and represent that for our kiddos.
Absolutely. This is awesome. Thank you both so much for your thoughts on all of these questions. I could listen to you both discuss this for much longer, but in the interest of time and everyone getting on with the rest of their day, we'll go ahead and wrap things up. Thank you all again for joining us this afternoon and evening. And thank you, Dr. Orange, for sharing your expertise and your knowledge. I wonder what my science identity would look like if I had you as my own teacher at some point. I think would
Not the first year. It would have been messed up if you had me the first year. But after that, everybody wanted to say they wanted to be a scientist by the time they left my room. That's for sure.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. And hearing you speak now, it just reminds me and inspires me that science is everywhere and is so important to our lives. And we really appreciate you spending your time with us this afternoon. So just a reminder for everyone, you'll get a follow-up email by the end of the week. If you registered with the recording and all of the links that we've talked about in this workshop so far, along with a certificate of completion for participating. So our next event will be in the new year. So keep an eye out for that. We'll be sending out emails with that information when it's all scheduled. And if you want any more information on our own distance learning resources, please be sure to check out our website. We'll put the link in there in the chat again for you, nhm.org/educational resources. And thank you all again. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. We wish you a safe and healthy holiday season. Warm wishes for the new year. And we hope to see you all in person at the museums sooner rather than later. So have a great rest of your day. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.